Yesterday, Ukrainian President Zelensky banned 11 leftist parties from participating in Ukrainian politics.
Будь-яка активність політиків, спрямована на розкол чи на колаборацію, не матиме успіху, але отримає жорстку відповідь. І тому Рада національної безпеки та оборони України вирішила, враховуючи повномасштабну війну, розв'язану Російською Федерацією та зв'язки деяких політичних структур з цією державою, призупиняється будь-яка діяльність низки політичних партій на час воєнного стану, а саме опозиційна платформа «За життя», партія Шарія, Наші, опозиційний блок, ліва опозиція, Союз лівих сил, Держава, Прогресивна соціалістична партія України, Соціалістична партія України, партія Соціалісти, Блок Володимира Саакашвілі.
These are not just fringe parties. Some of them do have seats in parliament. In fact, the opposition Platform for Life has 44 of the 450 seats in Ukraine's parliament. As such, what this represents is an authoritarian power grab. Under martial law, he has now outlawed 11 different left-wing political parties. He, of course, has accused all 11 of having ties to Russia. Yes, all 11 parties are allegedly puppets of the Kremlin. This includes one of the oldest parties in Ukraine, the Socialist Party of Ukraine. But this is actually not anything new in Ukraine. In 2015, after the US-backed coup, the Communist Party of Ukraine was outlawed, and communist symbols and slogans were also banned. Now keep in mind that this is happening as the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion continues to be part of Ukraine's National Guard. There are now many videos of the Azov Battalion doing some horrible things in Ukraine, from publicly flogging alleged looters to holding people hostage. There are also serious questions about the Mariupol theater bombing and the fact that this could have been a false flag attack staged by the Azov Battalion. Yet Zelensky and Western governments continue to back the Azov Battalion, even while Zelensky is banning left-wing political parties in Ukraine. Now, this is important for several reasons. One, of course, is the fact that political parties should be part of a democracy. Another is the fact that this information is being largely censored in the West. There are very few reports about Zelensky doing this, and any that do mention it say that these are Russian-backed parties. And again, the aforementioned crimes being committed by the Azov Battalion are not being reported in corporate media or many progressive media outlets either. In fact, we recently saw TYT trying to minimize the role of Azov in Ukraine.
And let me just say, if you're a leftist and you're like, why isn't anyone talking about the Azov Battalion? Why aren't you talking about the Azov Battalion? We could talk about that, sure. But I do find it interesting that it's all about addressing that without, honestly, without being very clear about the fact that this is an invasion that should be condemned. It's an illegal invasion. That should be the starting point. The starting point should be, this is a BS piece of propaganda from Putin. It is not the reason why he's invading, and this invasion should be condemned. With that said, though, is there some truth to Nazi elements within Ukraine? Sure. I just find it super curious that people want to discuss that right now.
And this plays into really what the narrative control has been coming out of Ukraine. We've seen many different stories getting debunked about the ghost of Kiev and Miss Ukraine supposedly taking up arms against Russia, even though this was really just an Instagram post. This happened with the Snake Island defenders. We've just seen repeatedly over and over again propaganda coming out of Ukraine that is not being analyzed by our media. This just points to the fact that this dangerous authoritarianism is not just happening in Ukraine, but it's happening in the West as well. We are seeing widespread information control. This, of course, is to shape public sentiment in regards to NATO expansion into Ukraine. Also, we've seen a strong push for a no-fly zone in Ukraine, which would effectively amount to World War III with a nuclear superpower. So things are getting very dangerous. This is something that I covered recently in my interview with Matt Taibbi. The fact that we are really entering an era of Orwellian doublethink and thought control in the West. So why is this so important? Well, I wanted to bring up a CNN article that talks about public polling in regards to American sentiments towards the war in Ukraine. The article, published last Friday, is entitled, "Here's What Americans Think the US Should Be Doing About Russia's Invasion of Ukraine." Under the section of US military action, the article reads, "Unlike their views about sanctions, Americans' opinions on a no-fly zone over Ukraine vary considerably depending on how the potential ramifications are described, suggesting that the full implications of the policy aren't well known to much of the public." In the CBS YouGov poll, 59% of Americans initially supported a no-fly zone, but that fell to 38% once it was described as something that could potentially be viewed as an act of war by Russia. A Quinnipiac University poll found that 54% of Americans approve of NATO's refusal to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, after hearing that such a no-fly zone would lead NATO countries into a war with Russia, with 32% disapproving and another 15% unsure. There was even more uncertainty in the ABC Ipsos poll, which found 31% of Americans supportive of a no-fly zone, quote, even if it could mean drawing the U.S. and its allies into direct military conflict with Russia, end quote, with 34% opposed and another 34% saying they didn't know. Now get this part, just 17% of Americans say the U.S. should do whatever it can to help Ukraine, even if it means risking a direct war between the U.S. and Russia, according to the Quinnipiac poll. With 3/4, 75%, saying the U.S. should do whatever it can to help Ukraine without risking direct war. Similarly, 62% in the Pew survey oppose taking military actions that would risk a nuclear conflict with Russia. All of this is to say that the control of information is very important. The way that this war is being characterized by corporate media, and again by faux-aggressive media, I'm talking, of course, about TYT, Sam Cedar, Democracy Now!, The Intercept, BreadTube. The way that this war is being portrayed is very important, and information has to be controlled tightly. Scenes of the Azov Battalion publicly flogging alleged looters, or holding them hostage while playing the theme to The Terminator on a piano, or even the fact that Zelensky is banning 11 different leftist political parties in Ukraine. Controlling these narratives is crucial to shaping the way that Westerners think about the war in Ukraine. If it's widely known that Zelensky is banning opposition, or who and what the Azov Battalion is, or how they're part of the Ukrainian military, or how 30 years of post-Cold War NATO expansion and a 2014 coup led to this conflict, or the fact that the Pentagon was working on biological research facilities across Ukraine, if any of this information got to the majority of Americans, what do you think the majority of Americans would think about this war? Instead, we're spoon-fed a simplistic comic book version of what happened, that Vladimir Putin is a supervillain bent on global domination, and the poor defenseless country of Ukraine is fighting for its survival. That's why it's vital for any free-thinking individuals in the West who don't want to succumb to simplistic propaganda that could lead us directly into nuclear conflict. This is why we should all be doing our best to debunk this propaganda, and also making sure that stories like Zelensky's power grab and outlawing of opposition parties does not get completely censored out of existence in the West. I promise you folks, for as long as I have any kind of voice on the internet, I'm going to be doing my best to debunk this propaganda. Please do follow me across social media. Also subscribe to my newsletter at primoradical.com. And you can also support me at patreon.com/primoradical. Thanks again, folks. Stay safe, stay unpropagandized, and stay radical.